Good evening, good afternoon. Welcome to TinyTechGuides Talks, a live dive with Dr. Nick Jewell and not a doctor, David Sweenor. So Nick, I'm glad to have you on the show. Thanks for joining us today.
Great to be here. Thanks for inviting me, David.
The reason we're here is that you have just published a book, Mastering the Modern Data Stack, and it is ranked number 6 on the bestseller list on Amazon in the UK. Congratulations.
It's in a small niche, but we're getting there. Yes, thank you very much. Couldn't have done it without all of your help, so it's been awesome.
Awesome. All right, Nick. Well, let's just start right into this. What's the Nick's origin story here? How did you get to where you are today?
Oh, my superhero story, the radioactive spider. Absolutely.
That's right. Well, that's right.
You got it. Basically, I had a data science background going way back. I worked in drug design and chemical information science when I was doing my PhD. I always like to give a really simple analogy. And a drug interaction when you're doing drug design, it's a bit like a lock and a key. So the key will fit into a lock, and it either causes something to happen, or maybe it blocks that location and prevents other things, maybe bad things, from happening. So my job as a young PhD student was to try and understand what the lock looked like by bringing together lots of different keys, lots of different chemicals and drugs, to try and kind of understand which part of the key actually made a good fit. So I got to work with some pretty cutting edge technology, some genetic algorithms that helped me align all of these keys, looking at lots of different chemical properties along the way, and then a whole bunch of statistics. So I ended up building a lot of models that kind of highlighted feature importance of all the good keys, and then that could be used in drug design programs. So some of the things that we see in data science, machine learning today, doing all those years ago.
Wow, that's amazing, Nick. It reminds me of my first programming language was Fortran 2, a derivative of Fortran preferred by particle physicists worldwide.
Oh, fantastic. Is that like the cheaper version of Fortran?
I don't even know what it was. Don't ask me to describe it.
Oh, no worries. Well, that got me into the world of analytics. I got really lucky after that. I spent over a decade working with some really amazing teams at HSBC. So I first of all started off in the investment bank, then ended up working more widely for the global group, building out some large-scale analytics solutions, got to work on financial crime, analytics architecture. Ended up learning a lot about how to describe all of the patterns that get involved with data management, with analytics, and also data science and machine learning as well.
Wow, that's amazing. So now you're a top-selling author in the UK. We're gonna milk that one too.
We've got to work those caveats. Absolutely.
In there, little asterisks by there. But what motivated you to write the Mastering the Modern Data Stack, an executive guide to unified business analytics?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think there's probably two little stories around this. So the work that I was doing back at HSBC, really capturing what was called functional architecture across the bank. So picture this, if you had to explain to an alien what the bank actually did, a functional architecture diagram was a really great starting point. Kind of broke down the business machinery into functions and into processes, and then you could start to see what the landscape looked like. So whether that was on a regional basis or maybe on a divisional basis, some of the things we did, we look at retail banking, the stuff that we do day to day with checking or savings accounts. We look at the UK and we see how did those functions compare to operations in Hong Kong or maybe the USA. And then likewise, you can take a function like customer onboarding, bringing customers into a company. How did that look for the investment bank, maybe versus wealth management? So we started to draw all of these diagrams. You started to get some real aha moments in that process. Maybe you end up looking at all the different payment systems that you have across the world. Why did we have 150 payment systems? It really didn't make any sense. Why did we have 10 different ways to manage customer relationship data? So it was a really fantastic tool for rationalization, but also looking at ways to understand how the company was investing, but also maybe if the company was looking to streamline as well. you could highlight all of that complexity. So that's story number one. That got me these functional building blocks. Secondly, my last job was working at a company called Incorta, and we were doing some product marketing, positioning, and messaging. David, you've got a pretty good book on this as well. Basically, trying to understand how we fit with the concept of a data lakehouse. So open source storage, query engines, that kind of thing. And I discovered this brilliant reference article from the folks over at Andreessen Horowitz, so that venture capital firm that's very much talked about in Silicon Valley. They describe these reference models for data lakehouses, and I just ended up using their models all the time for storytelling as I was building out my positioning. So treating this really as another form of functional model, mastering the modern data stack was just my effort to really flesh out what a lot of people were talking about, trying to take these stories, trying to go down into the components behind the scenes.
Okay. So, do you think the situation at the bank with the 160 systems has changed? Have we gotten more? It's like, it's always nirvana. I'm surprised when we talk, all the customers you and I have both talked to over the years, like how ugly the infrastructure is when you get in on the inside, and I'm just curious your perspective on that.
It's a really tough one, right? And I always picture this needle that swings one way to the other. So in some cases, you want to say, oh yes, we'll create a bespoke version of something to meet someone's exact needs. So the payment system in Vietnam needs to be absolutely bespoke, versus going the other way and saying, folks, we really need to standardize. This is costing us far too much money in terms of keeping the lights on by managing, 150 different systems that ostensibly are doing the same thing. So that centralization, decentralization, standardization, customization, these are all tensions that I think we see in the industry every day. So mapping it, understanding the landscape is always the first step in, making a better decision.
Okay. So you talked a little bit about this, but so how does, how do you think your experiences have shaped your perspective on the modern data stack?
So I think I've been really lucky. So when I started work at Alteryx, the company we both worked at for a while, I was really lucky to get a lot of at-bats. Let's use the baseball analogy. So got to experience lots of different companies, lots of different analytics challenges, lots of different departments across my journey. I've worked in everything from finance, from risk, working directly within business units. I think that really shapes lots and lots of at-bats when it comes to analytics architecture. You really get to see what works, and you probably learn the most from what doesn't work. So, my greatest failures in some ways, trying to build a real-time data warehouse far too early in the process. And you realize once you try and do this, that the closer you get to quotes real-time, the harder it gets, the more expensive it gets, the more likely it's going to fail. But also, you really should stop and say to the business, the stakeholders, is this really what you want or what you need? So that brings all of those experiences together, the failings, the success, just the diversity of this analytics career that I've tried to pour into the book.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And the real time, I was a little spoiled. When I started on my career, I was worked in semiconductor manufacturing, and we had a real time data warehouse at the time, Kimball Design, 1,500 users. And when I left that company, I was like, people do things in batch. It was so foreign to me because my whole experience in data and analytics was about real time because you're making widgets. And I won't forget that. And there's still a lot of batch that goes on today, and it still befuddles me a little bit.
Yeah, it's, and I think it's really interesting because the book has taken an approach of trying to use these functional building blocks, maybe rather than just paying pure attention to the vendor hype. So sometimes batch is perfectly acceptable for what 95% of business use cases need. But for those other cases, that's when you need to know that real time exists.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So, one thing I love about the book, and I don't know if we've even flashed it up yet. It's well, this is the wrong one. Holy crap.
Oh, David, come on, we've talked about this.
Let's get this one. The colors are so similar, but this is a great book. But one thing I like is that you have a lot of experiential knowledge in here. You have a ton of case studies and things like that. So, and you really emphasize this real world capabilities. So, how do you, what's maybe a pivotal moment or experience that really drove home the importance of, this approach to the modern data stack?
Oh, well, absolutely. So I'll give you a story from some work that I've done in my spare time. So I've worked really closely with a data science charity called DataKind here in the
Hmm.
UK. And they do some amazing works for social change projects, because what you find is with charities, they have a ton of really interesting, often very sensitive data, but they don't always have the skills and the talent to
Hmm.
go with it. So to bring data scientists and data people together with this data in a safe, controlled area, absolutely brilliant. For the listeners today, if you can find a DataKind event in your town or near to you, it's a brilliant way to grow connections in the industry. But going back to real world capabilities, we were doing a data dive with a charity that was looking to buy small plots of land in the UK. It was all about sustainable farming. Get that? That's an interesting data science case on its own. The land needed to be in certain parts of the country, needed to have certain geological features to be suitable. And I'd say even from the outset of this project, we knew that there were some great open source data sets available, geology, soil types, breakdowns even of like the little parcels of land that were actually available for sale. But rather than just dive right in, because we all know data scientists, right? They just want to roll up their sleeves, dive in. These weekends are more about cat herding than anything else, David, honestly. Um, what we did was we put our heads together and actually mapped out the modern data stack components that would be needed to actually solve this challenge. So things like, how do we store this data? How do we do geospatial analytics? How do we do data visualization, natural language processing? And that was actually really interesting, because you had all of these like classified ads for pieces of land. We needed an automated way to work out if they were actual farmland or just part of wealthy housing estates. So real interesting stuff. But then the analytic apps that get produced so the charity can get hands-on at the end of the day. So instead of just diving right in and trying to solve the challenge, without giving the picture, its full attention, breaking down the components really created this rich solution. And it was much more plug and play, because we could start to have much more mature conversations about, well, actually Python's better for this, or maybe, GIS tools are better for this component. And we can start to see where all the pieces fit together.
Okay. Well, natural language processing, doesn't ChatGPT take care of that for us today?
The world has changed, right? Exactly. But it's fascinating, because previously the charity literally would take a bicycle, cycle down an old English lane, and peer over a hedge to see if this field was good. This was like magic to them. And that's the beauty of doing these kind of data dives, taking amazing data sets, working with people with real challenges, and producing something magical.
Okay. Okay. I like that story. So, for people that are just starting their journey in data and analytics, what's the one takeaway from the book you want them to walk away with?
Oh, crumbs. Okay. So great question. I'd say, first of all, my first bit of advice, read the book from cover to cover. It's a tiny tech guide. It will only take you 90 minutes with a good, strong cup of coffee. I will say, folks just starting their journey, there's going to be some aspects around new terminology. I encourage you to dive deeper, follow the links in the book, follow the case studies. If you're interested in learning more, basically just be curious and follow your nose into areas that really interest you. So this could go one of two ways. You could find a niche that's interesting to you. So in the book, we talk about all kinds of fascinating stuff like reverse ETL, headless BI, you name it, it's in there. But maybe you can follow what we also cover as the data gravity within the system. So some of the mega vendors, the cloud service providers, are doing some really interesting things around storing, querying, and processing this enterprise scale data right at the heart of the stack. So there's so many interesting directions you could take it.
Oh, that's great advice there. So with all the, hoopla around generative AI and modern data stack, where do you see the future of the modern data stack, and how do you anticipate it evolving?
That's a good one. So honestly, and you and I both know this, it's a really, really exciting time to be working in data analytics and probably the modern data stack more generally. There's probably a couple of big forces in play right now. So first of all, we talk about the modern data stack as being this tightly integrated set of different components, all of them best of breed, all of them working really smoothly together. And there's also the mega vendors, the cloud service providers wanting a bigger piece of the pie. So they will come to you with marketing that says, why risk overspending on integrating all of these smaller components together when you can have one vendor to rule them all? So this is where we see this huge big picture architecture coming from AWS, from the Google Cloud Platform, even Microsoft. And in 2023 alone, Microsoft Fabric is a really interesting development, a set of really cohesive services that pull together. I'd say secondly, We also talk about the modern data stack as being closely aligned to the concept of centralization. We talked about this needle earlier on. So, that's existed since the earliest days of the data warehouse itself. In the last couple of years, a really strong opposing force has actually appeared in the form of the data mesh, which is much more around decentralized delivery of data products, analytics, insights to an organization, maybe even beyond an organization's four walls. It's early stages. I think we're starting to see ourselves getting beyond the initial peak of hype. We're starting to see folks like Eric Broder, who's done some great work on deployment patterns for data mesh. It's going to be really interesting to see if Gartner changed their minds on this topic. They called it and they said this is going to be an obsolete technology before it reaches the plateau of productivity. We almost should put some money on this. I'd like to see whether they're right, whether they're backing a different horse in this case, but that's another one to watch.
All right.
And then I'm going to give you one more. I'm going to say we can't not talk about large language models, right? Every single vendor that I've seen, and Matt Turk has this amazing diagram. We've included a small snapshot of it in the book called the Machine Learning, AI, and Data Landscape. Thousands of vendors all sprattered onto this screen. Nearly every single one of those right now is scrambling to include a natural language interface that's based on some kind of large language model. So again, my recommendation here is watch the mega vendors. Snowflake is doing interesting stuff around partnerships in this space. Databricks has acquired Mosaic as a huge investment in their portfolio. Amazon, Anthropic, Microsoft, and OpenAI. It's fascinating, and it's a really active space. So keep an eye on what every vendor is doing here. It's going to get a lot easier to analyze your data.
Yeah, I think it is quite an exciting time. I do have just sort of a random question. What is it with data people? They're very creative. We have data mesh, data fabric, data lakehouse, data swamp, data blanket. Like, are we running out of terms, or any predictions on some new terms that we might get in the future?
We've still got a data skip and a data refuse center where we might recycle some data. I don't know. I'm calling it now.
There you go. You've coined it. All right. Well, now this has been a great interview. So I think we got the TinyTechGuides top 3 rapid fire questions, and let's see how you respond to these. So, if data analytics were a sandwich, what ingredients would it have?
Okay, right. So we're going to need a solid foundation. Let's grab some homemade sourdough that we've somehow managed to keep bubbling away and brewing for the last 24 hours. We'll talk about sourdough very quickly. Let's think. It's scalable. We can make bread, loaves, the whole works. It's pretty elastic and it's pretty resilient. It can last for decades. So sourdough's my foundation. My filling, David, it's got to be bacon, because data is the new bacon, right?
Try the new bacon. You put the quote in the book. I saw that.
You got it. Exactly. And in the UK, we don't just cremate bacon like you guys do in the States. So we'd recommend a couple of good dry cure rashers. You know what? The little pizzazz on top, let's have some HP sauce, because we're coming from the UK. A little bit of data visualization, a little punch for our stakeholders as well. How about that?
I love that. That is exactly right. So, okay, next question. What is more challenging, deciphering complex data or deciding what to watch next on Netflix?
Okay, 100% Netflix. Those folks really do themselves a disservice. They have so much diverse content, and you either end up watching what's on that top banner. Yes, Love is Blind, Series 5, or you start to death scroll, and then it's Lady Luck taking over. I want to give all of our listeners today a little tip. So if you go to netflix.com/browse/genre and then type a 4 or 5 digit number, you will find carefully curated micro categories. So if you want to find wine and beverage appreciation content, you want to find understated horror movies, Netflix has done this amazing data cataloging behind the scenes, and they don't talk about it. It's so amazing. So if you want to find one of those categories, 1458, that's your wine and beverage appreciation genre. Get stuck in. It's great. It's amazing.
That is awesome. All right. The last question, if there was a data and analytics superhero, what would be their superpower, and what would be their name?
Oh, are you a subscriber to Disney Plus at all, David?
I used to be. I turn these services on and off, almost like a monthly basis.
Quite right too. You probably should do that. But on Disney Plus right now, there is a series called Secret Invasion that is basically a spin-off of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Okay. They have these aliens called Skrulls. And Skrulls can basically shapeshift into anyone and inherit all the powers of the Avengers. So it's kind of a bit weird. It ends up with the actress who plays Khaleesi in Game of Thrones basically becoming a bit of Thor, a bit of Captain Marvel, a bit of Groot. Very, very special effects heavy. Kind of a dog's dinner in terms of a plot. but basically the strongest character in the multiverse. So this is my data analytics superhero for you. So you've got data management skills, you've got a little bit of architecture, you've got analytics chops, you've got a bit of data science, and you've probably got a good large language model helping you out throughout. So I'm going to call them, here we go, not a data skip, not a data refuse. Let's go data dynamo, somebody, you know, that can really power things up. And they probably wear those Clark Kent specs as well, you know, to carry on as a regular mortal for the rest of their days.
I love that. Well, Nick, I appreciate your time today. This has been an amazing discussion. Congratulations on the book launch again. You know, I'd encourage everybody to grab a copy. You can get them wherever fine books are sold. If you're nice to Nick, he might send you an autographed copy. So
absolutely, get in touch on LinkedIn for sure.
That's right. And if you have a copy, please leave a review on Amazon. It really does help. So Nick, thanks again, and have a great evening.
David, thanks so much.